After you listen to today's episode of the podcast, if you'd like to explore more information on how you can bring more mindfulness into your life, especially to help you deepen your connection to eating plant-based vegan food, I invite you to join a free Facebook group that I've started. You can find the link by visiting the blog post for this episode at markdillon.com/80. Welcome to Mark Dillon's Plant-Based Conversations. I'm your host, Mark Dillon. Today on the show, I had the opportunity to speak with Bob Stahl. Bob has been eating plant-based vegan food for, a couple of decades now, but he also professionally teaches mindfulness and meditation retreats. So Bob's going to share both his journey to eating plant-based vegan food and also share some information about how you can bring more mindfulness into your life. How about yourself? How are you doing when it comes to mindfulness? And really, mindfulness is simply an awareness, being aware in this moment. And that can help you so powerfully when it comes to eating plant-based foods. At the end of the interview with Bob today, I'm going to come back and share with you a brief mindfulness meditation so that if you're new to this, you can start to establish your own mindfulness practice and bring more mindfulness into your life. Because if there's one thing that can really deepen your connection to eating plant-based food, it's having an awareness. Because once that you have that awareness, then everything else can open up for you. The conversation with Bob really begins at the beginning for him on his journey to eating plant-based. So let's get right into that conversation next.
So I actually began exploring vegetarianism when I was in college. In undergraduate school in northern Vermont in the early 1970s, I had two women friends who were vegetarians, and they actually introduced me to vegetarianism. I never heard of such a thing. And they actually even had a dog, a Samoyed. They raised this dog as a vegetarian. It used to eat lettuce and used to be kind of amazing to me. But I wasn't very convinced about being a vegetarian and continued to eat meat. But a few years later, after living in northern Vermont, going to undergraduate school there and starting graduate school in San Francisco, I actually began to look at more becoming a vegetarian and became one for a number of years. And I stayed a vegetarian for probably about 6-7 years. And then I went to Burma, became a Buddhist monk, and tried to be a vegetarian there, which is very difficult because begging for food, people would put into your bowl, you'd get a nice curry, then on top of that would be a fish soup, and on top of that would be a pork plate, on top of that might be chicken, on top of that could be vegetables, and by the time you walk to and back, everything had just kind of mixed together.
To offer some background here to bring you up to speed about what Bob is talking about, as a Buddhist monk, he was doing what is known as alms round. That's ALMS. And that is where the monks leave the temple and they go out into the community with their bowl, and that's the bowl that they have their meals in, and they walk through the town, and the people in town support the monks this way. It's a way of offering generosity and supporting the tradition of Buddhism. And so when Bob speaks about going out, that's what happens. He walks around with a bowl, it's a begging bowl, and offers that, and people put in whatever it is they would like to offer. And sometimes it may be something you want, and sometimes it may be something you don't want, but part of that practice is to simply accept the generosity that's being offered. Okay, let's get back into the discussion with Bob on this.
I actually was pretty committed to being a vegetarian, and so I would weed through the meat and just eat the vegetables. And during that particular time in my life, I actually lost quite a bit of weight and eventually came back to the United States disrobed, and at that point was living in a monastery in Boulder Creek that a whole group of us helped found with Tungpu Lucero, the Burmese monk. while I was there, I was a vegetarian for some time, but gradually, since there was such a lot of meat eating in the monastery, none of the monks were vegetarians. I began eating meat again. And it was only after leaving the monastery and my wife conceived, and I just kept on thinking about vegetarianism and health and veganism. And I realized with my son that's going to be born in the next few months that I just decided I wanted to really support my health, and I felt that a vegan diet was the healthiest. But more gnawing at my heart was this feeling of the abuse of eating flesh, using animals. And so I actually became a vegan about maybe 6 months before my son's birth and have been a vegan for the last 26 years.
Bob, as somebody who has been a meditation teacher, but prior to that, as a Buddhist monk, you followed the teachings of the Buddha, which are known as the Dharma. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Through the years, just to feel very passionate about being a vegan, and of course, in the Dharma and the teachings of the Dharma, the very first precept is panatipata. That's Pali. That means to abstain from killing. But actually, the literal definition of panatipata actually comes from the meditation instructions anapanasati, which means the mindfulness of breathing. And literally, panatipata, the first precept, literally means to not take away one's breath. That's what it's meant by not killing or harming beings. And so I think that's a very powerful definition, not taking away one's breath. And I feel like the teachings of the Dharma are so immersed in non-harming, such a practice of kindness, of compassion for beings. So how can I be a practitioner of the Dharma and a teacher of the Dharma with not living as best I can with the Dharma as best I can, living with the highest of integrity? And of course, I mean, I'm not perfect by any means. You can ask my wife and my kids. But, as much as I can aspire to do the least harm possible, now, I know that even some of the clothes I wear and the products that I use might be built and created out of exploitation. So, I mean, we have to do the best we can. What is our rationale, our relationship with these 5 precepts of not stealing and killing and hurting with our sexuality, or wrong or painful speech that creates distrust or intoxicants? But how do I develop a wise relationship with these? And so my sense as a practitioner, particularly to kill an animal and eat it, feels absolutely horrifying to me.
You and I first met at a meditation center where I was the facilities manager, and I remember myself going there for the very first time when I was starting to work there, and I thought, well, clearly they offer vegetarian food, they have vegan food. This is going to be a place that's filled with people who are eating vegan food. But of course, the reality was very different. Many of the people who work there were eating animals. And I have to admit that over the years, people have come up to me and said, how come everybody here isn't vegan or at least vegetarian? And it was just, well, that's just not what they do. I mean, they're not out there killing the animals themselves, but they are clearly, in many cases, eating the animals. And so I'm curious what you've noticed. Have you noticed a change over the years of people who work at meditation centers who are eating plant-based?
Yeah, sadly, I don't see any change. And with my colleagues, I actually keep it more to myself that I'm a vegan. I find sometimes I have actually, people will refer to this and think I'm holier than thou, or I'm kind of like a guilty conscience for the meat eaters sometimes of the meditation teachers, because, they don't like to hear. It's a very interesting thing. Like I hold my life to be so incredibly dear, fragile, precious, sacred. I hold my wife's life, my kids' lives. I believe that most all sentient beings hold their lives to be precious and do not want to die. And I do not want to take away a life for food. Now, I am actually, to be very honest, surprised with the number of practitioners and Dharma teachers that still eat meat. I don't understand how they can do this, knowing that it's actually directly killing animals. And there seems to be a very popular thing in the Buddhist world now that have joined the bandwagon, very importantly so, of climate change. I brought up to a fellow colleague, Dharma teacher, friend of mine, well, how about we bring up stopping killing animals? And of course, the animals have a lot to do with climate change. The amount of pollution that is gathered through the waste from animals is a major contributor towards climate change, but no one wants to talk about animals. So I find it, I'm really perplexed with my colleagues. Why are so many eating meat? I don't know.
Well, Bob, let's talk about the meditation, and because I'd like to talk both about meditation and then about using mindfulness when eating. So let's start at the very beginning, and I realize that for someone to fully get meditation, it would take us hours to go through that. But just briefly, where would somebody start? Where would somebody begin if they were interested in learning more about mindfulness and actually doing some meditation?
Mindfulness practice is about being present, living in the here and now. And often, as we look at the workings of our mind and our heart, we're off somewhere else. We're off in the future, off in the past, and missing what's happening here and now. So one of the most important practices of mindfulness is to reside in the present moment. And there's times where it might be very helpful as a way to help train the mind to focus on a particular object that helps you to gain more steadiness, such as breathing. Breathing is something that, of course, we as all human beings are doing. And so we can bring our awareness to the breath. And as we breathe in, we're aware that we're breathing in as we're breathing in. And as we're breathing out, we're aware that we're breathing out as we're breathing out. So there's a sense of developing our steadiness and our awareness as it's happening. So there's these formal practices of bringing our mindfulness to the breath. Gradually, we can expand to bringing mindfulness to different bodily sensations of the senses, or even to the different states of mind, of thoughts and emotions as they come and as they go. So that is a formal practice of mindfulness. And we can also say that mindfulness is a way of life, and that there's the informal practices of bringing our mindfulness into our everyday living, such as being aware of brushing our teeth as we're brushing the teeth, being present to washing the dishes, folding the laundry, sweeping the floor, having a conversation with our friend or family member that we're actually really listening to them and being present. So mindfulness can become a way of life of bringing it into our day-to-day activities, as well as perhaps finding a place where you can be alone and in a quiet place for a little bit, sitting in a position that you can be comfortable and alert. You can even lie down if you like, and perhaps for a few minutes just being aware of the breath as it comes in and goes out, or connecting with different sensations in your body or different sounds, or perhaps even at times just experiencing how these different thoughts and emotions, they're constantly changing, constantly coming and going. We begin to see in meditation that all of these different emotions and thoughts, they come and go. And of course, as we begin to understand some of these stories, if we were told early on that we were not going to amount to anything, that we were not smart, or you can't sing, or you're not pretty, or you're not whatever, we begin to believe these stories, and these begin to limit our lives. But as we begin to understand that these are stories, that they're not the whole thing, we potentially can expand to areas of freedom that are possible.
What are the stories that you're telling yourself today when it comes to eating food? If you're like many people, you're telling the same story that you were once told as a child. You must eat a balanced meal, and of course that means meat, potatoes, and a vegetable, and maybe occasionally, if you're good, dessert. The beauty is when you see it as just a story, you can then investigate, and with wisdom, actually then take action. And it will take creating a new story. Those stories that we tell ourselves over and over and over again are there because we tell ourselves those stories over and over and over again. So to create a new story simply means, first of all, finding out what it is you want to tell yourself. Make sure that there's truth, that it's based in something that's important and true to your beliefs. And then tell yourself that story repeatedly. What if you always told yourself, I'm eating this great food because it's benefiting my body. It's benefiting the environment. It's benefiting all animals. This is the best fuel I can have. Coming up next, I asked Bob, how do we know we're doing meditation right? How do we know that we're practicing mindfulness correctly?
There's so many different ideas about what you should experience in meditation. And of course, some people have ideas that it's about an out-of-the-body experience. Others feel it's about blanking the mind. We're not trying to blank the mind, but to understand it more clearly. Like sometimes the mind is clouded with anger, sometimes it's with fear, sometimes it's feeling busy. But our practice is to be aware of what's here and acknowledge it. And so we're not trying to blank the mind, but in some ways becoming more aware and understanding of how our mind works. And the one that actually is becoming aware of what's here has more information so that they can actually respond in a way that is much more productive than if you're unmindful, if you're unaware. That can lead to old patterns of reactivity that reinforce those stories of, for example, unworthiness. And so if we become aware and we recognize, oh, here's a story again, that moment that you become aware that it is a story, you begin to become more free of it. And so in our mindfulness practice, we're not trying to blank the mind, but trying to know and understand the mind. The mind meaning our thoughts and emotions, our lives. So that sometimes we'll speak of mindfulness. It's an insight meditation, helping us get deeper understanding and insight into what is fueling and driving these stories that enslave us. And as we understand them, we can experience more and more freedom.
As somebody is exploring and eating vegan food, can you talk about mindful eating and how, with that awareness, they could actually have a deeper connection to that moment?
There's the practical aspects of whatever it is that we're eating, that we're aware that we're chewing and tasting and swallowing, and the understanding that, what is the meaning of this food? It's to continue to keep the body going. Just like a furnace needs its fuel, this body needs the fuel of food to grow its head hair and body hair and nails and teeth and skin and make the organs working and our life living. So we begin to maybe break some of the spell of the enchantment about food and begin to really have a sober understanding. This food is what's necessary for life. But it also doesn't mean that we shouldn't enjoy it, but like to bring our mindfulness to really taste that strawberry or taste that crunchy celery or to taste that crunchy pretzel or whatever it is. I mean, that we can bring, if we're really there for an experience, we're going to get more out of it. And this is the gift of mindfulness. If we're present, we'll be there for the experience. And so we can bring our mindfulness to eating, to making love, to brushing our teeth, to doing the dishes, all these different activities, but why not fully be there? But again, as a vegan, I get great happiness in eating a type of a diet that doesn't involve killing animals. There's a certain happiness that just fundamentally arises when I'm eating vegan, because I don't have the taste of any exploitation or any blood in my mouth, if you will, knowing that the food that I ate caused tremendous pain for another being.
I think a lot of people, when they are eating vegan and they go to a restaurant, if there isn't, an exclusively vegan plate, they can stress out because of that. And if you were to go to let's say a steakhouse or something like that, how would you as a vegan approach that, and how would you accept that? What would work for you?
Yeah, well, I got the salad bar. And so that's what I do. And, it's interesting because we brought up my kids at first vegan and then vegetarian. And then gradually, as they got older, they chose to want to eat meat. And so, when they come home, we get meat and we cook it for them. I'm not thrilled about it. I would be so delighted if they became vegetarians again. But these are my kids. And, they want a burger. I'm going to help them to make this. And, There's times where I feel a little like I get a little disgusted, but I try to work with it because these are my kids too, and I want them to be happy. They know that I would probably be much more happy if they were vegan, but they probably know even more that I want them to be happy and to be healthy. And so, there's many times I'm going out with people and they're eating meat and different things, and it's like, I feel like I don't have to campaign in making people feel bad about themselves. I think just the example of this is how that I live my life, and I'm willing to be with you eating whatever you eat. I may not be fully thrilled with it, but I'll keep it to myself. I will not share my disgust with another. Because I also love this person. This person is really wonderful, and I want to be with these people who I love, and I'm not so thrilled with what they're eating, but I'll just make the best of it. And my statement is, this is how I'll live my life, and I hope they'll respect that.
Well, Bob, this is awesome because so many people do struggle with that, and they, and I understand it. I understand that the whole social norm that, we are stepping away from the social norm from society in a sense when we decide to eat vegan, to eat plant-based. And then, of course, our thoughts are, let's get everybody here now because now we understand this and we want to share it. But when you have family members that aren't doing this, can you just talk about how it is that you do that? How do you let go so that it doesn't create stress? Because I know so many people, it really weighs on them and it is painful. And sometimes what they'll do is they start ending these relationships because of that. And can you just talk about how it is that you can just say, yeah, I wish it were different, but I accept that this is how it is, and move forward with that?
Yeah, because the relationship is more important to me. I of course love my children. For many, many, many years, twice a year, my family travels with about 3 or 4 other families, and we do a summer vacation together in the foothills of the Sierras, and then also around Thanksgiving time. And I'll make my tofurkey, and somebody might bring some turkey. And when we go in the summer things, like, I'm not thrilled with it. I wish that the refrigerator would be meat for, could we once, I think probably every vacation I go on, at least one time it comes up in my mind, wouldn't it be nice if just for this one time it was all vegetarian? So I have to admit that I still have those thoughts, and I'm not thrilled with having the meat there, but my relationships with my friends, I love them, and this is more important. And so I've learned to respect it, and I'm fiercely vegan with myself, but I try not to be fiercely putting my trip on others. They have to really find their own way, and I feel that the most I can do is live by my example, and that's the best I can do. But because I've also seen sometimes where it can strain. I don't want to strain a relationship with a person who I really love. And all of a sudden you're not my friend anymore because you're eating meat. Like that doesn't seem very spiritual, very nice. I want to have compassion for them, and it's a funny thing, but I've learned to live with it, and also to support them, and they want to be happy too, just like me. They want to experience life just like me. They're more just like me than not. Yes, they happen to choose to eat meat eating, but someday they'll go, gosh, you've been this vegan for so many years. Like you make me think about eating less meat. And so maybe just by my example, that may rub off. I don't want to be giving another trip out on people. And particularly at the point of costing a severing of a friendship or relationship, that doesn't feel good to me.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that, because it's something that I know a lot struggle with. So I appreciate being able to talk openly about it because it's important. It's extremely important.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about for yourself. Let's say that it's the end of the day. You've been working all day and you come home. What is it that Bob puts together for a quick meal that you don't have to take a lot of time with? What would be something that you just throw together quickly?
Well, often what my wife and I often do is we do a lot of stir fries. And we actually have a garden. I live in Northern California, and we have the luxury of being able to have a garden year round. And so there's always some greens in the garden to be harvested, and often with tofu or tempeh, maybe a peanut sauce, or And actually, at this point, we don't eat as many grains anymore, so it's mostly just vegetables and proteins. And so we'll put that, just like a stir-fry vegetable, or sometimes steam and make a tahini sauce or whatever. I love tea, and so I drink a lot of pu'er tea, which is actually a fermented tea from China, and that kind of keeps me going through the day, too. And of course, we'd love to have eat nuts, and so you'll find a lot of nuts at our house and beans, also not only tofu, but different bean dishes we might have and so forth.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your work, because you've mentioned during this interview that you travel around. Can you speak about the work that you do and how you bring mindfulness into the world?
Yeah, thank you. I actually do a lot of different things. I live in both the worlds of the non-sectarian mindfulness world and the Buddhist Dharma world. And so in the non-sectarian mindfulness world, I teach what's called mindfulness-based stress reduction that was developed at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center by Don Kabat-Zinn. And I contract with a few different hospitals in Northern California and the San Francisco Bay Area, and we offer these 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction programs for people living with stress, pain, and illness. I also offer teacher training programs to become a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher. I actually work with the Center for Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where I'm actually also on their faculty. I'm a senior teacher, and I do a lot of teacher trainings working for them nationally and internationally all over the world, doing teacher training with mindfulness-based stress reduction. And then in addition to that, I'm a guiding teacher at Insight Santa Cruz, which is a Buddhist Insight Meditation Center in Santa Cruz. And we have a team of teachers that are teaching there. So I teach when I can and coordinate with the others to teach there. And then in addition to that, I teach a lot of Insight meditation retreats all over the world. So this is the type of, this is all that I'm doing, which is a lot. But I space things out, and I also have some time just to be home and to work on my garden and to write and to go for walks with my dog and my wife.
Well, with all that traveling and a lot of air travel as well, how is it that as a vegan, you make that work well for you?
When I'm traveling, I'll order non-dairy vegan food, but I'm often bringing some of my own food on the plane as well. Sometimes it's challenging, and their idea of non-dairy food is not exactly what I would make at home, but I'm grateful that there even is that option when, on planes, when you're going long distance, they have non-dairy vegan options.
Well, Bob, if the listeners would like to stay in touch with the work that you're doing, what's the best way that they could do that?
Yeah, I have a website. It's called www.mindfulnessprograms, and programs with an S, it's all one word, mindfulnessprograms.com. And so that's how they could get a hold of me and also see what I'm doing and so forth.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of this with us today. I really appreciate your time and the incredible information that you just offered.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate our conversation.
I mentioned earlier that I wanted to share with you a guided meditation, so let's get into that now. And let's begin by talking about the environment. In other words, where do you actually do this? Well, ideally, you'll find a place that works best for you and a place that you won't be interrupted by anybody. And that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a silent space. So you might hear traffic outside, or you might hear birds chirping outside, and that's okay. We're not looking for this ideal kind of environment where there's no sound, there's nothing happening, but ideally a space where you can just sit there and you won't be disturbed by somebody else coming into that space. So how do you sit? Well, it's completely up to you. You don't need to be on the floor in some kind of fancy lotus position with your legs crossed or anything like that. If that speaks to you and that works for you, then by all means do that. But you can simply sit on a chair or on the couch. I do find it most helpful if you're going to sit on a chair that you sit towards the edge of the seat. In other words, not leaning back and allowing this kind of relaxed position where you're leaning back and just sitting there and just allowing the space to be, but to be more up front on the seat at the edge so that your posture is a little bit more upright. It allows us not to lean back into it. And that provides a bit of an alertness. So try that out and see what it's like. It's not a rigid position, but you're just sitting there kind of at attention, so to speak, or with attention. Next, your eyes. Most people find it comfortable and best to just close your eyes. Now, if that's uncomfortable for you, what you can do is allow your gaze to focus downward. In other words, you're not looking or staring at anything. You're just looking downward. You're not looking around. You're not trying to take in many different things that might be in your space, but just to look downward and allow that gaze to be relaxed. Let's talk about what you can focus on. So many people find that using the breath as a way to bring mindfulness into their life is powerful because it's with you all the time. It's been with you from the moment you were born, and it will be with you until the very end. So that using the breath as a way to focus is beautiful because it's available every single moment. Now, where do you notice the breath? For some people, they'll notice the rise and fall of the abdomen, or maybe as the air enters or exits the nostril. Wherever you notice it is perfectly fine. And if you have a hard time noticing it, maybe by placing your hand on your abdomen, you'll feel the rise and fall. And you'll see that there's an in-breath and an out-breath. And it takes no effort at all. It's been happening the whole time you've been alive. So there's no need to alter or change or direct it in any specific way. It will just naturally happen. And all you do is pay attention to it and use that breath as an anchor, a way to stay focused. Now, you may find at times that as you're paying attention to the breath, your mind will wander off to a thought, or maybe you hear something and you start to notice that. As soon as you notice that you have not been paying attention to the breath, simply bring your attention back to the breath. And you repeat that over and over again. No matter how many times you wander off on another thought or another sound, when you notice that you've gone off on that thought or sound, come back to the breath and begin again. It's this back and forth. It's a practice to stay with the breath. But like any kind of practice, over time, you'll improve and you'll develop new richness and sensations within that. So let's begin the actual practice of sitting for a couple of moments, for 2 minutes. Beginning in this moment, bring your attention to the breath. There's an in-breath, and naturally, it is followed by the out-breath. Allowing it to be exactly as it is. There's no need to change, no need to alter, no need to control the breath in any way. Just notice it. Much like a cloud passing by, we just simply observe the breath. An in-breath begins, it ends, and an out-breath begins, and then ends. This back and forth continues. If your attention begins to wander off to a thought or to a sound, whenever you notice that you've gone off to that thought or sound, simply bring your attention back to the breath. There's an in-breath and then an out-breath. simply returning your attention time and time again to the breath. Where is your attention right now? Are you with the breath? If not, bring your attention back to the breath now and begin again. Now that brings together about 2 minutes of guided meditation. It's really a beginning. It's a chance where you can just touch in to the breath. Practice this over the next few days. See what it's like for you. Now be aware, in the beginning, this may be a bit of a challenge, right? Like, oh, I kept thinking about other things. That's okay. That's actually natural. That's just what happens. This is a practice, and it's called a practice because, like anything, we just keep coming back to it, and over time, we'll notice new things, and we'll get, quote-unquote, better at it. But just simply being with the breath allows us to be more present in this moment, because the breath is only here right now in this moment. And of course, how this can connect with eating plant-based foods is when you're in the moment, when you're truly connected to the moment, there's so much more clarity. And of course, having clarity with your journey to eating plant-based foods can be so much more enriched. Okay, until we get together again next week, go enjoy some great plant-based foods. Take care.